You could have all the supply in the world, but if people don't know you're out there, then you don't have the demand. There might actually be demand, but if nobody knows that the store is open or the store even exists, how are you going to match that demand
Right.
to the product?
Hi, this is Garrett Sutton, and you're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavagioni, and today's guest is Aaron Hale. And Aaron, I am super stoked to have you on my show. I recently had the honor of being a guest on his podcast, and now I get to have this legend on my podcast. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's mutual. Thanks, Mike. That was great. I hardly refer to myself, not frequently, as a legend. I appreciate the recognition.
Absolutely. Yeah, nobody ever would refer to themselves as one. That's what makes you one. Aaron, I want to kick these things off, this podcast episode off the same way I start every episode. And I want to know if you could share a little bit about yourself, your story, let the audience know who you are. So could you tell us, who is Aaron Hale?
Yes, sir. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, Midwestern boy. I was the epitome of the all-American slacker. I had just enough natural ability and talent, and added with a touch of BS to get by on without having to do a whole lot, put in a whole lot of effort or hard work, and be that BC student. But then I got to college, and everybody who knew how to work hard and had work ethic, I think it's called, passed me by very quickly. And I found myself without a diploma and having wasted far too much tuition. That's when I turned to the military. I needed a few more skills and also needed to earn back the tuition. And so I decided at the time, and I found out through the story, I call myself now the blindest guy with shiny object syndrome. Because at the time, I wanted to be a chef. I decided I love to cook, so I'll go to culinary school as soon as I get that GI Bill. So it was going to
Sure.
be 4 years out, go become a chef. And of course, quite a few service members. I fell in love with the service. I loved being a sailor. I was stationed in Italy for 4 years, starting in 1999, the time of peace. And I was loving it. I was cruising around the Mediterranean as a personal chef to the commander of the Sixth Fleet and cooking for him and the top brass on duty. We were pulling into all these foreign ports, and off duty, I was taking those MWR trips all around Europe. It was awesome. Hardship
Nice, nice.
duty, it was not. Yeah, it was great. However, of course, it wasn't very long thereafter that we found ourselves in two wars. And then it was just one of those things. In a few years, I'd picked up exactly what I was hoping. Yeah, dedication to duty, a little more self-worth, yeah, the value of putting effort into something, actually having ambition and goals. And I'd fallen in love with service, working for and with those service members to my left and right, and for something far greater than my own, myself. But I also noticed that I was cooking for an admiral, and I loved the job, but I was watching these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq play out on television. And everybody's job is important, everybody's role in the military, but I wanted to put my skills and abilities, this newfound pride in service and work ethic into a greater capacity. I want to do something better. So I volunteered to go to Afghanistan. I was a cook in Afghanistan. At this time, I was cooking for hundreds of ISAF, NATO troops. The chow hall had Portuguese and Spanish and even Italians. Even I learned enough of the lingo that I was speaking Italian in Afghanistan to these guys trading freeze for those vacuum packs of espresso. So it wasn't
Very
too
nice.
bad. That's when I met some EOD technicians, explosive ordnance disposal, the military's bomb squad. And wow, that was it. And something immediately clicked. Those guys that get in the bomb suit, tight knit community, this highly technical job. And the fact that they're first responders on the battlefield, everything told me this is exactly what I was meant to do. Of course, the Navy liked my cooking too much and told me, nope, you're not going from cook to EOD technician. When my contract was up and my deployment was over in Afghanistan, I returned home. I did not re-enlist. I just went over to the Army recruiter and said, here's my service record. I want to become a soldier and I want to become an EOD technician. And they welcomed me in. So I trained up to become an EOD tech and deployed once to Iraq and then once back to Afghanistan in 2011. And this time as a EOD team leader. And about 8 months into the 12-month deployment is when one of those IEDs, those roadside bombs, I had my name on it. The blast took my eyesight. It cracked my skull in a couple places where I was leaking spinal fluid right out of my nose. And it did some damage to my ears, but I still had some hearing. And of course, it ended my military career.
Yeah. Aaron, that's the fact that you came in, you had these aspirations that you wanted to be a cook, you wanted to use your GI Bill to go to culinary school. That was the dream. And then not only that, but the job you got in the Navy was being an actual cook, right? So it was a great way to hone your skills and do something you really enjoyed. And then September 11th happened. And I think for a lot of us, that changed the trajectory of everything that we have known in our career in the military, because you go from a time of peace to a time of war and just everything changes, right? The whole dynamic. And you found yourself in this spot where you wanted to contribute more to the war efforts and you volunteered to go to Afghanistan. It was pretty uncommon, but it started to become more commonplace to see sailors do boots on ground deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq and stuff. But those were totally voluntary, right? So the fact that you jumped right into that shows your dedication. But then you fell in love with this with the EOD community, right? You met EOD technicians and you said, "Man, that's what I want to do. This is your calling." And fast forward, the Navy said, "Yeah, sorry, man. We want you to stay doing what you're doing." So you got out, went to the Army, and then finally did what you wanted to do as a EOD technician. Now, the fact that on that deployment as an EOD tech with the IED strike and everything, a lot of people at that point, I feel you lost your eyesight, most of your hearing. A lot of people, I feel, would just give up at that point. And when I look at you and I hear your story, and I've listened to your podcast, right? And I've listened to more of your story, and just seeing what you've done since that's happened is just absolutely amazing. And I definitely want to get into that. I want my listeners to know that what this did not only changed your life, but you didn't let it stop you and it became a catalyst for something greater, right? And the things that you're doing today are just amazing. I want to preface this with this, that for my audience that's listening right now, Aaron actually a couple weeks ago just got done running the Badwater 100. He did this fully blind, right? He had a lead, he had a team that helped him get through it, but he completed this race, right? And this is one of the hardest races you can ever do if you're a runner. I used to be a runner. I say used to because I don't really run that much anymore. But when I saw like your training, because I was following your stuff on social media, man, I was like, holy crap, man, look at this guy. And I was following all your training, and then you actually got up to the race day, and then you did the race, and I'm like, holy shit, man. Look, I was like, he freaking did it. And it was amazing. It was amazing for me to see that, but it must have felt even more amazing for you to accomplish something so significant. And I point this out because I feel a lot of people would look at what happened to you and look at being blind as a significant disability. But I feel like you said, dude, there's nothing that's going to hold me back in life. And that's the vibe I get from you, man. Every time I hear you speak, every time I see what you're doing, you're like, dude, nothing's going to hold me back. And I'd like to get into what that's done for you as an entrepreneur, right? So I know there was a lot of recovery. There was a lot of things that came together after the incident, right? But since then, you've become pretty much like a serial entrepreneur, right? Because you don't just do real estate, you also have a fudge company. So I want to just talk about all that, man. Tell me where you
Well,
want to start, but I want to know, like, from the time that things happened to where you're at now, what was that journey like?
absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to sound like a stickler, but I know a couple people heard you say Badwater 100, and this race was 35 miles past my longest distance, which was a 100-mile ultra marathon. This is
Mm.
Badwater 135,
Oh,
and it's
sorry.
actually it was far, much further than I'd ever done before, and it starts at the Badwater Basin, which is 282 feet below sea level. And it goes to the Mount Whitney portal, it's about 8,000 feet, with two other big climbs up and down in between. So it wasn't just the distance, it was the heat, and there was definitely a whole bunch of elevation gain and loss. Yeah, it was definitely a crucible. I've been through a couple. And yeah, I've been injured. I went to Walter Reed and learning how to come to grips with this new blindness and yeah, changing my career path, my entire life altogether in darkness. And the first thing I was angry, of course. I was frustrated. I was mad, mostly at myself. I was mad at the world. I wanted to blame something, and I wanted answers to why me? What if I'd done something else? Like, what if this? What if that? I call 'em my demons. It was the voice in the back of your head that just gives doubt and fear and anger. And they come to us all the time, right? Doubt, worry, anxiety, and we ask those questions like that can't be answered. And I didn't want to get caught in that spiral of depression, anxiety, and like just anger at the world and myself by not being able to keep asking those impossible to answer questions. And it was my family, it was my support system, it was those other warriors up and down the halls. And really, it took the focus off of me, what I'd lost, and my situation. And frankly, I just knew that I realized that I'm not the only one going through a personal battle. And I'm not the first one. And my pain isn't all that unique. I don't have a monopoly on pain. So who do I have? Who am I to have an excuse? Even if in my head, it was a pretty good excuse for quitting. It really wasn't. I was responsible to those warriors. They were fighting. Why couldn't I fight? And I was
Yeah.
responsible to my family, my mom, my dad, my brother and sister, my son. I was responsible to them and for them. So I couldn't just say, I throw my hands up, I'm done. And frankly, if I wanted to quit, it would have to be put up by committee, and I don't think I have the votes. I instead
Right.
had to carry on. I had to fight. I had to figure it this blindness thing, this new life. And I decided if I was going to be blind for the rest of my life, I was going to be the best damn blind Aaron Hale I could be. And I started, yeah, I got to work and learned how to do basic living skills like pairing my socks. You wouldn't believe it. And cooking and using accessibility devices like my talking computer and text to speech software on my phone and barcode scanners, that kind of stuff. And just learning how to get around with my cane. And then it was out of sheer terror of being stuck on the couch and feeling sorry for myself, being chained by my condition. I started researching. So it's like I could use my computer, my phone. I started researching, doing internet searches for outdoors, blind plus running, blind plus whatever, just to find a way to get out. And a few names started popping up, like Eric Weinmayer, the first blind guy to climb Mount Everest, the Lonnie Bedwell, the first blind person to kayak the entire Grand Canyon. And you know what? I looked these guys up. I went climbing with Eric. I went kayaking with Lonnie. I registered for marathons and I started, I registered for 4 marathons within the span of 4 months without having run anything longer than a 10K in my life. So I found a coach and I started learning how I was going to accomplish this. And I just got to work and I figured it out. I found guides and I started running shoulder to shoulder with a sighted guide and just putting on the miles and figuring it out. And then I was doing pretty well for a few years. Was upbeat, optimistic about my future. I was running marathons. I even qualified for Boston and ran Boston in 2015.
Wow.
I climbed a few mountains and I was even on my way to, I was 2 weeks away from heading to Kilimanjaro for the first of what I was going to attempt to climb the seven summits, the highest peaks on each of the continent. One day, 2 weeks before heading out to Kilimanjaro, I was feeling pretty sick. My head was spinning and I was really disoriented and fatigued. I lay down for a nap. When I woke up, my head was screaming. I don't know, headache, migraine, whatever it was called. No word I know does it justice. And what happened was the cracks in my skull that it had been patched up hadn't been completely patched. And I'd contracted bacterial meningitis and it was attacking my brain. So I was right back in the hospital 4 years later. This time it was going to steal my hearing, what was left of it that the Bob hadn't taken. It also took my inner ear sense of balance, that vestibular balance, my gyro. So I spent a couple months in the hospital and then I came back home in a wheelchair. Now, totally blind, totally deaf. When the doctor had broken the news to me, I asked if it already sounded like I was at the bottom of a pool. It sounded like I was congested or something. And he told me that I was going deaf. And I said, wait a second, are you telling me that I'm going to be blind and deaf? Wait, that means that I'm not going to ever have to pretend to pay attention ever again? It's silver lining to everything. But it might have been that I was too far gone by that time, but I didn't hear my mom or my girlfriend, wife now, who were in prison in the room. I didn't hear them didn't hear them laugh. It was probably the condition. I thought it was funny. But yeah, I spent a couple months in the hospital recovering from the illness, came back home in a wheelchair, blind and deaf, and had to go through it all over again, especially those demons, the voice in my head, this time saying, when is enough? When have I paid my dues? When has this soldier paid his fair share? And I can't do this anymore. Everything's shut down. Everything's silent. All those tools, everything that I learned in the last 4 years, how to cope and get by in this world, silent. And there I was sitting in my breakfast bar, feeling sorry for myself again. I can't do this and I can't do that. And why is this happening to me? But again, I was asking the wrong questions. And the secret to anyone's success is you got to start with the right questions, right? You got to ask the right questions. And I've been speaking, telling my story ever since going blind and starting to figure that out. And there was that whole message of triumph because of tragedy, because of hardship, of success through struggle. And here I was having to put my money where my mouth was and do it again. So I had to figure out, instead of why was this happening to me, why was it happening for me? And if this was happening for me, what can I learn from it so that I can teach it? I can share it with others. So somebody else that was going through trouble, hard times, maybe I could help show them the way. So instead of saying I can't, I started looking for ways to figure out how I can, right? If this method is cut off for me from now on, how can I do this? I got busy, even though I had terrible balance. I got back on the treadmill and I would hold on for dear life as I just hit the quick start and it would go half a mile an hour. I just started walking. And I took those trekking poles that I'd used in the mountains and I would just do this weird extended, like daddy long leg walk out to my mailbox and back. And I'll be exhausted, but then the next day I would go a little bit further. On the treadmill, I would go a little bit faster. And at the same time, the holidays were starting to come up, and I decided we're just going to throw a feast. I'm gonna make a huge Thanksgiving feast, and invite all the family and just going to make this huge spread. And I started cooking weeks in advance, cakes and cookies and pies. And I started making fudge batch after batch. And Mikhail, my girlfriend, she noticed two things. One was a smile on my face she hadn't seen in 6 months. Yeah, there would be a chance I could hear. That's how I could communicate with you through the cochlear implant. But it would be over 6 months before I'd get any sound through the thing, or even longer before I could understand another human voice. But she saw that I was smiling again. I was doing something I loved cooking, and I loved sharing that edible art with people I love. So I was excited. I was actually looking forward to tomorrow. And the other thing she noticed was the fudge was piling up. She snuck it out the front. She started sneaking out the front door. I'm like, you got to be real stealthy around a blind deaf guy. But she gave it away. And friends and neighbors started coming back and saying, hey, yeah, that was pretty good. Can I buy some for a birthday party coming up, a baby shower? And the capitalist in me said, of course you may. And before we knew it, we had a business. It was a bit like a bake sale at first, but it quickly grew into something real. In fact, my garage, I turned into a pretty nice home gym. And it was so funny to imagine. I had the treadmill, the stationary bike, the rower, and then right next to that was the conveyor belt shrink wrap machine. But that's how we got our start. And we called it Extraordinary Delights, or EODfudge.com.
Yeah, absolutely love that, man. The fact that you were doing something that you were passionate about, right? Getting back into the kitchen and cooking and doing something that really brought you true joy. And you were able to turn that into a business, right? And start your journey as an entrepreneur. And now I know from there's so much more because you're also a real estate investor. And I have to ask you, man, like how I know a lot of things are challenging with what you have to deal with right now, but how do you go about your real estate journey with the way things are today?
It started off as kitchen therapy, right? I was
Sure.
just cooking and it was helping me get through a difficult time. And it turned into a business. And then what happened was came to that decision point where we had to come out of the home kitchen. We had like an OSHA rule, so we had to go into a commercial kitchen. And frankly, it was either go brick and mortar or e-commerce. And the thought of cooking like 14 hours a day or standing behind a register, that was my picture of hell. We went the online way and we found a co-packer, a larger commercial, like a larger candy company that would take our recipes and make exactly what I was making, just on a larger scale. They would do all of the labor, the supply, operations, production, shipping. And then we basically became a marketing company. And the home kitchen
Nice.
became the R&D lab. And we were generating revenue and decided we had the time that we were spending cooking and cutting and wrapping. Now we could focus on other passions too. And I wanted to start investing that active cash flow into things more passive. Of course, I looked to real estate. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I knew that I wanted to get into real estate, but it was a long educational path, a long learning curve to decide which method. And it's so funny because the very first investment we made we bought and it was a fixer upper. We were going to do the Burr method from an online auction out of state using hard money. So probably the most difficult thing a blind deaf guy could do. And it turned out like you would think. It was a disaster from the get-go. But
A lot of first deals are, no matter the situation. So I could only imagine.
yeah, but it was 2019 and the market was just blowing up. So we had the market in our favor, the tide rising with us. And most of our estimates were on the low side, including the rehab budget, which actually doubled. And I'd also made the mistake, I didn't know this, that hard money lenders want to lend to an entity, but I'd put my own name on the purchase contract with the auction house. And so the hard money we had lined up backed out. We had to use all fudge money, all our own cash until we started running out of that, even towards the finish line as the rehab budget ballooned or just expanded. And we had to find a private money lender to help us get us across the finish. But thank goodness it appraised for far higher than we'd thought it would. And it rented for far more than we assumed it would. We did some research, but the market had bailed us out and we were able to recoup. We give our private money lender the seed capital plus pretty good interest and return, pull most of our own equity out and keep going. And we also had a great contractor, who's just a magician, putting this house, this century home back together. And this was in my hometown of Akron, Ohio. And I knew what the streets looked like, and I knew what the homes were like, the community. And my mom and my brother had already done a couple flips. So we had boots on the ground. We had a few things, like a great team already in place. And we bought another single family, we bought a duplex, and we just kept doing it. And during that time, as we were expanding this operation, Michaela got her Florida license. We set up is partnered with a fellow wounded veteran who would complement some of my weaknesses, like sight and had a driver's license. And we partnered with my buddy Dan, and we started finding off-market deals and either assigning those contracts to other investors or keeping them for ourselves to do right here in Florida. And we have long-term rentals, we have a few short-term rentals. They're all doing really well, and we love this process. And the whole time now, we're using very little of our own capital as we invite private money lenders to use that lazy self-directed IRA money for our projects.
Nice. Nice. Okay. Yeah, so are you also wholesaling as well? It sounded like you said that there's some that keep for yourself and some that you are passing along. So are those wholesale deals?
That's right. We'll get under contract. We'll either assign it, or if it's within our buy box, our criteria, we might just hold on to it. And sometimes we work out the contract so it fits our scenario. Mostly we want to make it the best possible solution for the seller. And then we'll either hold on to the property or we'll find a buyer interested in buying or interest in that contract.
Okay. Right on. Aaron, I want to ask you, when you transitioned from cooking the fudge in your house and packing it up and doing it there, having to mess up your beautiful garage gym for the shrink wrap machine, to go from that to doing more of the e-commerce thing and having that other company take over the recipe and do it that way, you said that you became more of a marketing company. Do you find that what you've learned on the marketing side has helped you on the real estate side?
Absolutely. There are a few things as far as marketing goes that are just universal, right? You could have all the supply in the world, but if people don't know you're out there, then you don't have the demand. There might actually be demand, but if nobody knows that the store is open or the store even exists, how are you going to match that demand
Right.
to the product? For example, when that COVID quarantine lockdown time, and we did what pretty much everybody did, was start a TikTok profile. And I started doing a daily cooking show, Aaron Hale's Cooking Without Looking. And
Nice.
yeah, so 1 minute little kitchen hacks and recipes and stuff. And the one thing we've definitely realized on that is that you've just got to be consistent. Some of those videos really flopped and some of them really took off. And sometimes we didn't even know why. We had to dig into what was it behind that video or this video that was successful, and really talk to our audience. And we grew our followers to over 150,000 in under a year.
Wow.
And it was just because of consistency. I think I have a pretty decent personality, but it really has to do with consistency and your content. You got to know who you're talking to. who have that picture, who's watching, and really drive the message that they're trying to answer the question they're asking.
Sure. Absolutely. So by creating this TikTok account, was this more for marketing the fudge company
For one thing, it was
or
something to
marketing
do.
yourself?
I think one day Michaela just put her camera in my face and said, "Start talking. What are you doing?" And it was really her idea, her concept and innovation. And then we just went with it. And there were a few times where it was just me talking out on the front porch, talking about my thoughts on things or showing people how I use accessibility devices. And then sometimes it was actually in the kitchen, showing them how to make grilled cheese or something. And it's just funny. The best, I think it was one of the top rated, most viewed videos was best ever grilled cheese sandwich.
I'm gonna have to go back
So
and watch that one because I'm a grilled cheese fan. So I'm gonna have to go watch that video on TikTok for sure.
it is a pretty good sandwich.
Okay.
But yeah, it
I'm
was
not just gonna take your
consistency.
word for it, man. I'm gonna go make it.
It's the same with when you're marketing anything, right? You start building a brand. It wasn't about, we weren't, almost none of our videos had anything to do with fudge. It was me in front of the camera talking to one person out there. And I was showing them what I thought they were interested in. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I wasn't. But the more I put out, more content I put out, the more information I would get back. And I tried to steer the future content towards what our avatar was looking for. And not only that, when we pivoted, we didn't give up the fudge business. That's still going. But we built this brand, which is Aaron and Hale family and Michaela, who was the Florida agent, and we expanded our brand and we started talking about other facets of our lives. So I'm a wounded veteran who likes to go for a run on them, who also has a fudge company and invests in real estate. And then I share from time to time on our social media platforms about all those things. And if somebody's interested in buying our fudge, they know where to find it. And if somebody's interested in investing with us, they know how to contact me. And if they're interested in, say, following along on my podcast, let them know how they can find the podcast.
Yeah, no, that's great. Like you're building yourself up as a brand. And I'm trying to do something similar. I started off this podcast. It started off as a blog, then it became a podcast. And the podcast itself did really well. And it's its own brand, right? But
Mm.
there's so much more to it. And I've been trying to like rebrand myself lately. And that's one of the things I've been focusing on as well is like, hey, I'm more focused on I'm Mike Cavagioni. This is what I do. And here's how you can find all the things I'm doing. So now I focus more on sending people to my personal website, which like, hey, you could find my podcast here. You could find my financial coaching. You could find any real estate deals I'm working on.
Mm.
Everything's all in that one spot. So that's, yeah, I'm trying to do the same thing. So it looks like you've got that really down to a good science, but there was a key word that you said that I wrote down because I absolutely love this word, especially when it comes to making sure you're targeting the right people, and that's finding your avatar. Who is your target audience? And that's the biggest thing is making sure that whatever it is that you're providing it to that specific person. And I think that's huge. I think a lot of people don't use that word enough, avatar, and knowing who it is that they're talking to, who it is that they're trying to sell their products to. And I think that's huge for sure. Now, when it comes to your entire organization, the Aaron Hale organization you've got going on, what does it look like? So you've got the fudge company, you've got real estate, right? You've got your podcast now. So what does your organization look like today?
You've probably heard this said also, but when you market to everyone, you're really marketing no one. The shotgun effect really spreads out and has very little effect the further out you spread. So
Right.
if people are considering who they're selling to or marketing to, and they don't know yet, maybe they should just be talking to themselves, talking to that that person they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You're sharing lessons you've learned, you're sharing your story. And who better to teach than the person that you used to be? If you have a product that's specific, maybe you should find that the customer that is really looking for that product and gear the message around that. For me, if I would have the fudge buying, real estate investing, ultra marathon running podcast host be that'd be pretty niche. But
Just a little bit.
yeah, a little bit. But instead, I just talked to the guy who's maybe doing one of those things. He just did just a few years behind me. Sometimes I'm talking to the real estate investor and I just say, you know what? It blew my mind when I learned about self-directed IRAs, that you could
Mm.
actually write a check out of your IRA and go invest in somebody else's deal instead of just stocks and bonds and mutual funds. And like that was an epiphany. And then talking to the guys just trying to get it right. And there's no way I would have even considered or even possibly imagined that I'd be running bad water even 10 years ago. I found out it was possible. Here's how I did it. And same with the fudge business or even family life or dealing with disabilities or hardships in general. I talk to my past me and say, here's how I did it. Here's a couple of things I've learned. And if you'd like to find out more, you know where to find me.
Yeah, no, that's what it is, man. You gotta sometimes just get specific to who you're talking to, right? And yeah. So, Aaron, you know what? I'd like to go ahead and transition this into something that I call the final round. It's where I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on the show, and it gives us a good idea of how you are when you're under a little bit of pressure. But you're going to crush it. You're going to crush it. So, if you're ready to go, we'll get that party started.
Let's go.
Okay, let's do it. So, Aaron, first question of the final round is, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made when it comes to your finances, investing, real estate, or just business in general?
Besides that whole HMO or the hard money loan debacle with the first deal, I've bitten off a little bit more than I could chew. Had too many deals going at one time without paying attention to the details. I'm not the detail guy. I'm the big picture guy, and I just didn't set up the systems properly. And so for me, I love biting off more than I can chew and then gnawing like crazy. But when I'm dealing with other investors' capital, you got to know what you're doing, and you got to set up systems that will account for, especially my weaknesses. We've got that sorted out, but it was a little bit of fly by the seat of my pants at the beginning.
No, definitely appreciate that because I know I can identify with that answer a lot because there's been several times where I bite off more than I can chew. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now that really resonate with that. So I definitely appreciate that. So, Aaron, this next question kind of ties into that one. And it's, what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first got started?
It was the whole pay yourself first thing, the richest man in Babylon, the profit first mentality. Set up automatic payments to where it needs to go, starting with your savings, your investment account, just paying yourself first, and make that ritual that never changes. And then you set up those buckets, the envelopes, you set up accounts for specific purposes. That way it's automatic and you have a plan. You could just look at balances. And it helps you tell the future when you know how much is going there, where it's coming from, where it's going, and how much you can afford to invest or not.
Absolutely. Love that. And recommended 2 great books in that answer as well. That's awesome. Okay, Aaron, third question of the final round is, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started out today?
Frankly, it's not really about a trick or a tip. It's just take action. Do something. You can catch phrase nowadays, but fail forward. But it's not a failure unless you quit or you get beat back too hard. It's always a learning experience. And failure is chock full of information if you're willing to learn. So, yeah, if you're learning, you're moving forward, don't be afraid of failure. Just take smaller bites at the beginning.
I love that. Take smaller bites. Oh, that's awesome, man. All right, Aaron. So, this final question of the final round, I'm going to preface this with, besides your own Do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast or both?
I don't know if it's business related. Yeah, it's good. But Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink is probably one of the best. I think there's a severe lack of responsibility, of ownership over one's actions. And if we can take responsibility for everything in our lives, whether it's your fault or not, we don't get stuck in that victimhood. If we make excuses rather than find reasons. Excuses are the dead end, like the bad questions I was asking. We have reasons. That is information, and we can move forward. So take ownership of everything, find a reason or a cause, and learn and move forward.
Absolutely. Great recommendation, man. Great recommendation. Okay. So that is it for the final round. However, I do have another question for you. And this is probably the most important question of this entire interview because my guests have been listening and they're like, Aaron, you have an incredible story. And they're just loving what they're hearing on this episode. And they want to know where they can find more information about you. So, can you share your website with us? Any social media profiles? Definitely the TikTok. And then, of course, your podcast. We definitely love to know where we can go and listen to that as well.
I don't want to inundate them with all sorts of stuff. They can find the Point of Impact podcast with Aaron Hale on all the major platforms and YouTube. And the website is pointofimpactpod.com. Of course, there's the Fudge business, eodfudge.com. And both of those websites will have links to the social media.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm going to make it easy for all the listeners. We're going to have those links in the show notes so you could just copy and paste or click away. Just don't do it if you're driving or anything like that because I want you to be safe. Aaron, this has been phenomenal. And I want to close things out with asking you if you have any final thoughts for our listeners.
Actually, my final thought was what you were talking about, expanding your brand beyond average Joe finances and talking about the mic behind the mic. And let's just say that I think that's a really great idea because you do also have a fantastic story. We share that, and that story will come out very soon. By the time you publish, I'll probably have published it.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. For my listeners, just I was a guest on his podcast recently, like I said at the beginning. Absolutely phenomenal podcast. Make sure you go listen to Aaron's podcast. The guests he has on and just just the quality of the show itself is just amazing. And I had a blast on there. So I know my listeners would really enjoy that show. But I also want to say, Aaron, thank you so much, man, for joining me today. This was phenomenal. I had a great time, great conversation with you as always. Every time I talk to you, it's awesome and amazing. Your story is amazing, and I'm so happy that I was able to share it with my audience today. So thanks again, man.
Thank you as well, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And also, I want to thank all of you listeners for joining me and our special guest, Aaron Hale, on the Average Joe Finances podcast today. Go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Aaron. Aloha from Hawaii, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.